On March 25, 2017, Samuel O. White will be inducted into the Alaska Aviation Museum's Hall of Fame in recognition of his many years as an explorer and pathway pilot in Alaska's aviation history. Sam O. White was born in Maine in 1891, grew up on a farm, and became a lumberjack and hunting guide before joining the Army and fighting overseas during World War I. Listening to stories from fellow soldiers, he became excited about Alaska and came north soon after his discharge. From 1922 and for the next 50 years, he traveled all over Alaska on foot, with dog teams, pack horses, boats, and finally by plane. He did reconnaissance work for the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey and learned how to survive in the wilderness, regardless of conditions. In 1927, he arrived at Fort Yukon. In Fort Yukon, he began his illustrious career working for the Alaska Game Commission as the first flying wildlife agent in the United States and possibly in the world. Trying to cover the huge interior Alaska region by dog team and by foot, he soon realized he needed a better way of patrolling this vast region of thousands of square miles, so he used his own money to buy an airplane.
He'd see my dad or my uncle fly over, and the same day see him fly back. And he didn't take him very long to figure out there was a better way than spending 2 weeks walking there.
Pioneer pilots Noel and Ralph Ween taught him how to fly. He was the first and most dedicated game warden in the interior. He enforced hunting and trapping regulations where there had been no previous enforcement and taught people to respect the wildlife conservation laws. In 1941, Sam resigned as a wildlife agent. He and Mary were living in Fairbanks, and he went to work for Noel Ween as chief pilot for Ween Airlines. For the next 2 decades, he flew as an Alaskan bush pilot. He was greatly respected for his legendary flying skills, the superior service he provided for the people of rural Alaska, and was considered by many to be the best of the Alaska Arctic pilots. He was a giant of a man, in physical stature, in his big personality, and with a huge, generous heart. He understood the needs of bush residents, and no passenger who flew with him was ever injured. He had unwavering loyalty for those he respected. During World War II, Sam flew charters for the U.S. Army Air Corps. Following the war, he returned to fly in Alaska until his retirement in the early 1960s. According to longtime friend and neighbor Richard Ween of Fairbanks, White was a consummate storyteller.
He's been called Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone, of Alaska, and I guess that's a fair analysis. I just call him Sam White of Alaska.
His friend and fellow pilot Jim Reardon wrote an excellent account of Sam's life in his book Sam O. White, Alaskan, Tales of a Legendary Wildlife Agent and Bush Pilot. Reardon's book provides a glimpse into the history of interior Alaska in the early 20th century, covering early mapping, the first fish and game enforcement and management activities in Alaska, and an introduction to flying in the wilds of Alaska. Sam O. White was a man of high standards and moral principles, focusing on doing things safely, whatever it was you were doing, but particularly when in command of an aircraft. His is the story of a man who wouldn't settle for the status quo. About his life in Alaska, Sam White wrote, "Alaska is a great land. One feels its greatness. I cannot imagine living anywhere else. It is here I hope to end my days." He never wavered in his devotion to the territory and state of Alaska. The Alaska Aviation Museum greatly appreciates the tremendous contribution Sam White has given to Alaska's development and aviation history, and welcomes him into the Alaska Aviation Hall of Fame.